So I'll start it off for today. So thank you, thanks everyone for coming out. Uh, today's topic is, today's presentation is sponsored by IBC, and today's presentation is we've titled CapEx and OpEx, Opportunities to Evaluate Delivery of Value. And today we're going to cover the core topics of CapEx and OpEx, but we're kind of delve deep about what defines them and the influences that are happening now in the marketplace for what can be considered CapEx and OpEx. So let me kind of jump right into it and introduce myself. My name is Marc Reber. I have been in the IT industry as a software engineer for over 25 years. Primarily have been doing development work in that period of time, and recently have transitioned over to a DevOps architect role in the last few years. I've been in all sorts of industries. It's really been agnostic to what my work has been. I've been in banking, pharmaceutical, retail, utility, security, and primarily government agency consulting since I moved down to Washington, D.C. about 10 years ago. I have a pretty big interest in cloud computing, and I've experienced implementing cloud technology in the DevOps tool chain. I also have 10 years of Agile experience with both driving Agile and also being on teams embedded in Agile, and have completed my safe Agile training in the beginning of 2021. So that's about me. Let me introduce my co-presenter for today, Kurt.
Hi. Yeah, next slide. Hi, Kurt Seidel. Like Marc, around 25 years of experience. I don't like the sound of that. It makes me sound old. Design, development, implementation of software. I've been in healthcare, telecommunications, pharmaceutical, finance. I spent 10 years working for McKesson on some dev teams doing claims processing. Been doing Agile. We had an Agile transformation way back then, and in 2010, and kind of went through some gyrations up until now. I've been a Scrum Master for the last IT project manager, Scrum Master for the last 6 or so years. But really sort of a geek about Agile. All the tools and the philosophy behind Agile and Lean and things like that. So I initially was studied economics for some reason, but then I got my master's in software engineering. And I, went through and got some of these certifications, including for SAFe and PMI. So nice to meet everybody for today. Next slide, please. All right, let me just rearrange my windows here. So yeah, this is our introductory slide. So the presentation today is about CapEx versus OpEx, right? So if you're a PM or if you're a manager, this is kind of a big deal, or even on your SAP timesheet, what do you tag as CapEx? What do you tag as OpEx? There's benefits to using CapEx, obviously, which we'll get into it during the presentation. In the old days, build, integration, deployment, that was kind of manual, considered OpEx, considered an expense. But in today's world, in DevOps, feature dev is handled by the dev team, as well as deployment automation, test automation, infrastructure as code, all these things, right? So since a lot of those things are becoming basically, covered by the dev team, well, at the product level, does that have any implications for budgeting in general? So that's kind of the topic for today. Hopefully it's entertaining for folks. Next slide, Marc.
All right, so thank you, Kurt. So in general, what do we mean when we say CapEx and OpEx? So we're going to talk about that a bit. We're kind of delve down because it takes some analysis of the underlying elements to understand where things land um, for CapEx and OpEx. And CapEx and OpEx are the budgetary expenditures of capital and operational sides of work. And of course, to understand that, we have to define what capital and operational work is. So operational work is everything that keeps the lights on: daily infrastructure maintenance, application deployment, day-to-day support, patching. We're talking here specifically about software-oriented things, but that can be easily, that traditionally comes out of uh, terms for other industries like just facilities and maintenance and items like that. Capital work is the delivery of new value, new functions, new content, and building value for the future. All these things that make a business grow. And so for IT industries, this means that the programming department is primarily focused on capital work because it's creating the new functionality. So in short, you can think of operations work as run the business work, and capital work as grow the business work. And these, in a broad sense, are classified as OpEx and CapEx. Now I'll turn it over to Kurt to discuss some of the benefits of CapEx.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so this slide, right. So obviously, if you expense a lot of stuff in a particular year, the tax benefit all has to come in that year. But if you capitalize your expenses, then they can be spread across some multiple years. So that's kind of like one of the main benefits of, you know, the sort of accounting practices, and you know, it impacts on project management, stuff like that. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. You know, it's a pretty simple concept. You know, I think the main use case for this is if you're in startup mode, you're making no profits. Whereas, you know, so if you're making no profits, then the expense doesn't really help you. But if you can amortize that over years, then you can get the tax benefit, right? So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Next slide, please.
So let's look at how Agile influences a company runs its business. In simplest terms, Agile advocates the delivery of value with the shortest lead time and the highest possible quality involved. Continuous improvement, incremental improvement, improvement in the delivery of value. All these things are what's core to the concept of Agile. And what we see is the prioritization of the highest value features means that the company is oriented to getting the most value out of what it's creating. And investing in these high value features, you know, moves the organization to be implementing its strategic goals. I mean, any company wants to be the most marketable in the overall marketplace. And so what we're seeing is, in short, Agile focuses on projects that change and grow the business. And so let's look at this from a historical perspective. Overall, the goal of the company is the capitalization of its development time. The capitalization is the profit area. This is the bias to new feature development because the traditional view of value has been new functionality. And what we're going to talk about later is this is actually not what Agile focuses on. It focuses on the delivery of this value. And in turn, this bias towards the development of new features essentially causes the neglect of what we like to call the ilities, which we listed here, like reliability, scalability, supportability, usability. There are others. But these are also referred to as quality attributes. So like actions like refactoring the code, optimizing the build, performance enhancement, and maintenance, you know, they wouldn't really occur unless it's like directly related to new features, because these are not we're not conceptualized as profitable actions, really just new feature creation was. So let me turn over to Kurt to talk a little about Conway's Law in relation to this.
Right. So, I mean, I'm sure folks are familiar with Conway's Law if you've been around safe and agile and lean and things like that, right? It's just kind of like it's this theory, that the organizational structure will influence the products that the organization creates, right? So on the left-hand side, so I'll just read it out. Any organization that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure, right? So in other words, if you have silos on the left-hand side, if you have a development organization which has members in different products, and then a QA organization and an operations organization, you're going to have local optimization, right? So the dev team, they're going to get all the glory because they're, capitalized. They're going to get most of the funding. And then, QA is an afterthought, and then operations is just something to be minimized, right? So you have this kind of competition between the departments, which creates local optimization, but not product level optimization, right? So on the right-hand side, right, if you have product organizations, everybody's working as a cohesive whole. So if you need to automate testing or if you need to automate operations, that money comes from the product budget. And it doesn't seem like we are robbing the development organization because, it's good for the product as a whole. Now, of course, if you organize, of course, this is the agile perspective too. But if you organize things by product, then one of the anti-patterns is each team's going to have sort of radically different approaches to everything. But that's kind of out of scope for this conversation, but just wanted to mention that as well. Next slide, Mark.
All right, so we've talked about the historical perspective, but let's look at the environment today and like the impact of DevOps on capital work and operational work. So as we kind of hinted at, safe agile underscores it's not the creation of value that's important, but it's the ultimate delivery of value. And bringing DevOps into the fold, combining the development and operations elements, it means that the operations portion is balanced prioritization between support activities and the actual implementation of quality attributes. You're not just doing keep the lights running, but you can have this with this integration, the focus on the quality attributes. And we've shown an illustration here on the right, and several more that are listed here, like testability, performance, reliability, and all these things are what makes increases the value of the functions that are being created. And incorporating quality attributes are as important as the features themselves, if not more. From the fact of in the modern software delivery, the modern marketplace, if there's an important piece of functionality that's created and it works and it's released to market, but it's like not highly available, not performant, not scalable, not manageable or changeable, it's going to lose out to its competitor. It's not going to be used. And this is what DevOps overall seeks to avoid. So how is what we're talking about achieved? Well, it's around the concept of building like an agile team, where the team has the ability to define, build, test, deliver increments of value on its own. And having these disciplines all in one group instead of what would traditionally be in silo groups is really where the team can perform the best. And this kind of hints back at what Kurt was saying with Conway's Law, is that by having all the teams together, they're all oriented to the product versus having their own interests and their own focuses. So we've included the illustration on the right, having the UI developer, backend developers, business analysts, DevOps workers, testers, all these go to create a cross-functional independent team, and now the team can design, run services, and fix defects themselves, which means, again, that all members of the team are focused on quality. So when DevOps team members are embedded into feature teams, affecting feature development and sharing ops feedback with the feature team. Software quality attributes are improved. So having DevOps as part of the team is the opportunity to get the entire development team, as we said, involved in quality attributes. Traditional teams concentrate on functionality and development of the functionality, which, you know, maybe you've seen something similar to the bar at the top. That's just one element of the whole cycle. And, you know, testing, deployment, all these are contributed to what is called the feature definition of done. And we see elements right where it's not just the acceptance criteria of the functionality that's developed, but it's all these other things that we kind of touched on before. You know, unit testing, functional testing, acceptance testing, performance testing, deployment automation. All these things are required to deliver the value. It's not just the creation of value, but it's the delivery about it. And so we've highlighted deployment performance as traditional practices that can be automated. And it's this automation of this toil that is the focus of DevOps, to automate these attributes: scalability, reliability, supportability. And a perfect example of like toil is like systems patching. So in its earliest days, you would have gone out from system to system and patched each server individually. And over time, this has been refined to where the toil has been automated. So you just had to automate patching, for lack of a better term, flick a switch, you know, set a schedule, and the patching just occurs across server. And it is this automation that is the delivery of value. And so now Kurt will talk about how this counters Conway's law.
Sure. Yeah, I really like that slide there with the definition of done. I mean, I remember back in the old days, we were wrangling about definition of done, you know, when we were doing the agile transformation. And, you know, getting those automation pieces as the feature complete definition of done is always going to be a challenge, right? Because that's like long run stuff, not short run stuff. You know, but obviously it's very important to do for the delivery of value. So that's just a little bit more on that slide. But yeah, you can go to the next slide, Mark. Right. So Conway's law, right. So how can we sort of harness Conway's law in our you know, to our advantage? So the embedded DevOps members will sort of inherently be, you know, advocating for those ilities, for testability and you know, all those automation activities, right? So in other words, so from a budgeting perspective, if a product gets a certain amount of money because they, you know, there's anticipated sales growth and stuff like that, the product leader, the manager, can allocate money kind of how they see fit. And it should be obvious to the product manager or the, you know, the management structure that these automation activities are critical. So that sort of guarantees a baseline of work that is increasing the system quality attributes as opposed to just new feature development. And I just remember back in 2008 when Sarbanes-Oxley came out, and we were told to only put time towards new feature development. You know, don't refactor, don't worry about performance impacts, anything like that, right? So, and I thought to myself, well, that's crazy. Like the system quality is being dictated by accountants, and it just was nutso. So this counters that, right? So the fact that you are, you know, everybody's on the same team. The product manager has authority to, you know, guide the even the ops people. You know, counters Conway's law in that respect. Next slide.
So we've talked a lot about like traditionally the capital work and the operational work, and we've talked about how like those lines are getting blurred and in a good way. And so we can look at something like site reliability engineering or the SRE. There's an opportunity for like long-term improvement to reduce toil. The improvement of site configuration, construction and monitoring, dashboards and reporting, improvement of site maintenance and site maintenance. The integration with the DevOps tool chain, all these are goals of SRE to improve the delivery of the value, as we referred to before. The operations department or the operations elements become project oriented by implementing infrastructure changes to reduce toil. And this shifts the work from reactive operational work where it's like maintenance to say proactive and growth oriented. So the quicker we can get the product out the door, the better we can, so DevOps toolchain, the better quality it has and the more sustainable is in the marketplace. These are growth oriented. And in turn, what we've seen is that generally accepted accounting principles confirm this approach.
Yeah, and Mark, do you want to go back to the slide again?
Sure.
So I have to admit, I'm reading the biography of Elon Musk right now, and this, right? So I think this is sort of in keeping with the sort of Elon Musk approach, holistic approach, right? So it's all well and good to build a rocket that has a good payload and everything, but how quickly can you get that back on the launch pad, right? So this is, this slide we chose the NASA control room for, optimizing space flight and having those, avionics and things like that. But it just occurs to me that if you're optimizing for future, you need to change the design of your actual system, right? So if you optimize your system for changeability and deployment and things like that, you're going to be much better off in the delivery value. So that's just a little bit more on that slide. Next slide, Mark.
All right, thank you. So let's take a look at the Financial Accounting Standards Board, or what's known as FASB, and their definition of internal use software. So we've included a lot here. FASB outlines what kind of software product can be capitalized, and they define a software product as either a new product or a new initiative that changes the functionality of an existing one. And we're kind of going to focus on that. Software in general is considered developmental for internal use, including production automation systems. And this is, again, key because automation is the reduction of toil. DevOps software is internal use software. And this encourages automation and counts as software products that can be capitalized because, again, what we see here is the definition of internal use for production automation. And this is really the key of how we can reconsider how CapEx and OpEx are approached from what's being done from traditional, like feature-focused groups and operational groups. So Kurt will talk more about this.
Okay. Yeah, is this my slide, Mark? This is a boring slide because there's no pretty pictures on it. But yeah, so rethinking CapEx, OpEx for features. Features include DevOps automation stories. So as we saw on the previous slide, automation of testing and deployment, things like that, that automation counts as software, internal software development, which you can write off according to the FASB, right? So so how do you operationalize that? Well, you make you make those items, those future-oriented sort of robustness items into user stories, right? And you feed them into the development team. Obviously DevOps is, the embodiment of this. And obviously some of this comes from the DevOps handbook. Hopefully everybody's read that book. It's really great. It has that holistic approach of, you know, again, it doesn't really make much difference if you make a new feature if nobody can use it. I mean, it could be the best feature in the world, but if you can't deploy it, if you can't update it, if it doesn't perform, it's not going to be worth very much. So again, if you can operationalize, the CapEx approach for these kinds of activities, then it's going to give you greater budgetary flexibility because again, you can write it off in future years instead of just the current year. So you can really, I mean, and these are future oriented activities, and then you can write them off in the future. So it kind of makes sense from that perspective. Next slide.
All right, so I'll talk a little about participatory budgeting. So just as an intro to this, like we've broken down CapEx and OpEx into what contributes to it, and what we're going to kind of lead into is we've taken a model to take the concepts of the work and break it down into individual stories over time, and then build back up the budget that reflects that. And so what we're going to start moving into is the elements that Agile has, or Safe Agile has, to kind of approach this. And so this, one of the starts of this is participatory budgeting. To achieve the automations of systems, projects should be scoped and budgeted as they become their own value streams. And SAFE provides the context of participating budgets for this purpose, so that the business can focus on delivering the highest value features. So in participating budgeting, the way it works is each contributing group gets the same simulated amount of money, so they can kind of contribute to a budget of epics and features. And we'll talk about that more in the next slide. But to take a look at like the illustration, maybe it gets viewed in the classic way of everyone taking a piece of the pie, but really participating budgeting, this illustration is more like what you can contribute to the overall pie, and showing what you value as a feature in combination with what others value as a feature means that the business kind of goes again to that strategic objective of going for the highest value functions. So kind of moving on, each value stream budget has two parts. The first is baseline solution investments, which are costs to develop, support, and operate a solution. These of course have to be funded. Example, these run the business needs are traditionally like employee salaries, rent, utilities. And we've talked about that in a software sense, where it's like, keep the servers up, patch the servers, elements like that. The second part, proposed solution investments, describes significant development initiatives need to improve current solutions or introduce new ones. And so examples grow the business are traditionally like tangible assets like buildings or equipment, machinery, vehicles. And then there's intangible assets like patents, or what we're focused on is software. And once streams have been decided on, funded during this participatory budgeting process, their characteristics of BSI and PSI get translated into categories pretty much as OpEx and CapEx, respectively. But in order to do this, in order to do this categorization, we need to track this at the activity level. So I want to move on to just a quick look at some of this. What you're seeing here is an example participating budgeting spreadsheet, and just a portion of it that Kurt and I prepared to exercise as an exercise to draw up a budget against the features, and as an attempt to take what we're developing and break it down into the CapEx and OpEx elements. This just takes one section of the spreadsheet representing one overall solution. We see here solutions in column B. And then that's been broken down at the epic level in column E. And then over in F and G are examples of where, or excuse me, G and H are examples of where people that are participating in the budgetary process, the simulated budgetary process, are contributing their portions of their simulated budgets to say these are the valued epics or valued features to us. The epics are essentially voted on by participating members of the ceremony by contributing their money. And the epics that are fully funded would be the high value functions that would be pursued by the companies. These in turn, what we actually fund, these in turn, these epics would be recorded in what's called an application lifestyle management tool, or ALM tool. And for our model, our choice of ALM tool is Jira, where we've broken these epics down to the feature level. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kurt to talk more about how we approach stories in Jira.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so I'm the Jira guy. Really like Jira. Try to use it for everything. So as Mark said, you know, from the spreadsheet, the model spreadsheet that we had from the participatory budgeting, we have the epic on the left-hand side, extend loan terms, and then we have, this is kind of like at a feature level, but in a system like Rally, you would have a feature level, but in Jira, we use the user stories for these. So we went ahead and we used Jira to kind of populate the user stories that cover the epic, in this case, extend loan terms. And then we tagged the user stories with a label called automated toil, right? Because the name of the game in DevOps is automating toil, getting rid of that manual work. And then these user stories, maintenance automation, SRE, deployment automation, test automation, they can become standard user stories within each feature, within each epic, that kind of cover those system quality attribute user stories, and they're treated like any other user story. So they would get a point value, they'd be put into a sprint and stuff like that. Next slide. So this is kind of like, how do you do this in Jira, right? I mean, Rally would be slightly different, but step one, you put the DevOps stories in the sprint. Any support stories you can also put in there, whether they are sort of manual or automated. You can, if your developers are working on it, you got to put it in the sprint, right? Make all work visible. Perform user story point estimation. Obviously, you can use Fibonacci, you can use small, medium, large, extra large. In this case, we would recommend using the Fibonacci because it's a little bit more accurate. And then what you can do is synthesize a cost per point metric. So this is where it comes into budgeting, right? So you can use historical data to really come up with cost per point. So in other words, if something is 5 points and it's $1,000 per point, then the cost is $5,000 for that. And then you can leverage that in your budgeting. Use the cost per point for automated and manual operations, user stories in CapEx and OpEx budgeting. So you can really forecast for the future. You can also use it retrospectively. This is our standard CapEx and OpEx user stories. This is how much it costs, and then you can start to track that and budget for it. Next slide, Mark. So again, we'll flip over to Jira in a little bit here, but within the feature, you can track this in Jira. So you can have a factor, CapEx versus OpEx versus automated toil. So if for instance, cloud-based infrastructure, 80% CapEx, 20% automated toil. So then you can assign those factors and calculate your budgets.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Sure.
So when we want to clarify automated toil, is that the difference between OpEx and automated toil on our stories is that OpEx would stay as that. It doesn't necessarily present an opportunity to be automated, where automated toil would be something that starts out as OpEx, but by automating it, you're investing the time and effort as a quality attribute to make it essentially shift over to CapEx. So you'll see OpEx on here, but really think of automated toil as starting out as OpEx, and then potential, what we're defining as the potential shift over to CapEx. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Mark. I think a lot of organizations would start out, if they're being honest, with all of this being OpEx, which means, yeah, we do all of our testing manually, we do our deployment manually, we do our smoke testing manually, we do, everything's manual. But then you can use that, you can start to see how much automation are you guys bringing to the table, and thus how much are we building for the long term versus how much are we rallying the troops for one last minute push, which is we're all familiar with, I'm sure. Anything else about this slide, Mark?
I know, I think the thing to mention is what this is for our model, the most atomic level of data we're having is that we're now at the lowest point of the model, and we're going to build this back up into line items on a budget.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Next slide.
So let me kind of jump in here with our approach. Kurt did mention we use actually, I'll touch on what Kurt mentioned a little while back as we go through this. So this is just a demonstration of how you can convert your stories. And I should qualify here again, for our model, our user stories are at the feature level. I think for general, that's a good enough level to get the accuracy you're looking for. You can do it even more granularly by actually doing it at the story level, but you're going to, as we're going to see, it's going to provide more overhead. So for us, we did stuff at the feature level, and these are examples of how you can approach the way to build out that conversion. The three examples on this page are CapEx by story hours, CapEx by story points, and CapEx by story count. The example again, build at the feature level provides the most granularity and most accurate accounting of the work, but it requires the most overhead to maintain, since each story will have to have the number of hours of work recorded against it, as it's completed. In contrast, the middle example, CapEx by story points, is a scenario where typically when agile stories are created, the story points are awarded up front, and all the information is available at the start of the story creation. So instead of waiting at the end, by the end of recording what you've actually done against a feature, you can kind of estimate up front what you're going to do, and depending on how your organization's accuracy for estimating stories, that's how close you'll essentially get on the budgetary line. Story count, the one at the bottom, is the basic counting of stories themselves, where they all have an equal weight. And it's the simplest to maintain, but it's also the least accurate, because you're not really comparing large stories to small stories. You're just saying a very rough estimate of, I have this many stories, therefore there's this much money represented. And these are only three examples of conversion. Again, we mentioned that we're doing ours at feature. You could do yours at a lower level, just requires more effort. And you could do something at a higher level, but again, you could do it at epic level, but you would lose accuracy. So what we've chosen to do for our model is to take the middle ground and do the CapEx by story points. As Kurt did mention, we take the estimated story points, we do $1,000 per story point conversion, and that's where we come up with our budgetary line items. And even then, you can make adjustments as needed. If you want to treat all stories the same, with the same number of value per point, you could be more granular than that. This model is very flexible. So I'm going to turn it over to Kurt to cover the results for a model.
Yeah, well, and it's just can we pause on this slide for
Sure.
a second? So obviously Agile has gone through lots of different iterations, right? So CapEx by story hours, that's like traditional Scrum, right? Where you're supposed to, in the first part, you're supposed to use the story points, but then you're supposed to estimate the number of hours, right? For the subtasks at the dev team. right? And that's like Rally does that really well. Story points, that's more like I would say safe. You know, that they recommend using the going to the story point level, because estimating by story hours is kind of a waste of time, some people think. Um, and then story count, this is kind of like the Kanban level, where your assumption is that all of your user stories are the same size anyway, plus or minus 1 sigma, let's say. So it doesn't make any sense to really spend any time on estimation. You know, I mean, David Anderson recommended small, medium, large, extra large as the kind of the level of granularity there. But story count, you know, I've been on organizations where they do use story count, because that is a metric that exists and it's not controversial. And they don't have to do any work. So any of these levels of detail would work for this, depending on your requirements. Next slide, please, Mark. Okay, so this is kind of like the output. We did the analysis. We went through and we did, you know, point estimation on the user stories, on the features, you know, using our experience on dev teams and things like that. And we came out to kind of an interesting number. 29% of the overall budget turns out to be automation of toil in this case, which kind of felt right to us. You know, right around a third of the activities for the dev team would have to do with you know, these kinds of DevOps activities. And so then it turns out that you do get some you know, there is a reason to capitalize that amount of work, because then that gives you the budgetary flexibility for the future. So this is kind of like our big reveal slide. You know, 29%. Obviously, you know, this is a model, but we did do some thinking in it, and it came out to have a nice number like that. So I think that's our last slide, right?
Well, we want
Mark,
to kind of sum up things.
right?
Yeah, it's our last slide of our model. Let me kind of run with this. So, you know, in summary, this approaching CapEx and OpEx, CapEx and OpEx from kind of what's happening in the world today, it allows greater flexibility on how you approach your operational side, to achieve capitalization goals, and therefore then can be qualified as CapEx budgetary line items. And this also, this whole thing allows the bake in quality attributes a lot better. It's not just the creation, as we said, not just creation of value, but like the delivery with like the shortest lead time with the highest qualities. These again are as important, if not more. And this reduces toil, and this automation reduces toil and decreases technical debt. And at the end of it all, the important thing is that it increases the value delivery. And again, it's not just about value, it's about delivery. So again, these are probably the high level points. Excuse me. These are the high level points as the takeaways from this approach.
So Mark, do we want to flip over to Jira now, or do we want to open the floor? Because I feel like, you know, normally when I give a presentation like this, every single slide I stop for questions. But
Yeah, we're at 15 minutes, so I think we can. Why don't we ask if they'd like to see some parts of our model, or we can just go straight to questions if that's what the group would like.
any
The series in
preferences?
action.
Hi, I think at this point with the what we should do is just show a little of our model.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I mean, it's always super boring to watch a presentation like this until you see the person clicking around on the actual software, right? And then you can watch with bated breath. All right, now I need to share, right, Mark?
Yes.
All right, that's not used to Zoom. All right, there's my other screen. All right, so now I gotta get myself out of here. Okay. So this is our Jira board. Right. So we have, we created all the epics for the different you know, aspects of the system, under development. So extend loan terms. Um, we created our sort of a Kanban board here that goes, has the different workstations. So, we said that, autofill forms is kind of a key user story, a key feature. And we said that that is 100% CapEx, right? In the sense that it's a new feature. I mean, autofilling forms for loan processing is key, right? So, but we said that that was already built by the dev team and it's in the testing phase. But it's 100% CapEx, 0% automated toil. Hopefully everybody can hear me because I'm getting a message. But then if we scroll over to the SRE related user stories, maintenance automation for one. We said that that's 100% automated toil, right? So, and that the user story points for that is 20. Compared to the rest of the features in the Epic, 35, 25, 20, maintenance automation 20, deployment automation 15, test automation 15.
Kurt, can I mention one thing here?
Sure.
So again, these points are would be summations of the story level user stories beneath these features. So that's why you're seeing something much higher than say a Fibonacci, is that these would be a sum total of a more granular level.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mark. I mean, I think we've all been on dev teams where they try to have giant user stories and then they sit there for 2 months. So it's good to, you know, use top-down planning and then, these would be broken down into user stories using user story splitting and stuff like that. These are really at the feature level. A feature might take a couple of months to build. So thanks for that, Mark. So I mean, that's how we build it up. We use Jira. And then in order to get that spreadsheet, we just exported a view. I can show you guys a little bit more here because we did spend some time on this. So these are all of our user stories that we put into our, Sprint 7. Obviously, we weren't really doing the dev on this, but it did seem like a cool project, actually. Like I wouldn't actually mind being on this project. But then you can see the different, the different features as Mark said, and then all the different story points, right? And we used estimation techniques where we kind of had to agree. We we didn't have more than two people. We didn't really have three people doing the estimation, but this is kind of what we did. And then so yeah, so that's kind of our approach that we used to use Jira to explore this topic. Dominic or Demetrius, do you guys use Jira at your place of work?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, this is the kind of like this is the out of the box Jira that you get if you try to sign up for Jira. Obviously, enterprise organizations would have different features turned on and stuff like that, but we were still able to have a reasonable approximation of, of this use case.
And let me mention that this is our model is in combination with other things we saw on the slide. So we have participatory budgeting kind of initiate these epics. These epics are the core of it is breaking it down into this level of detail in Jira, and then taking these back up from a line item standpoint into, and we did it in the simplest terms in an Excel spreadsheet, but a budgetary summation of it all. And having these three fields, I don't know if you can click to one of the automated stories, Kurt, but having these three fields means that it's pretty easy to track and enumerate the the changeover from by having the automation toil separate from the OpEx, and having a field that specifically says, if and when we achieve automation of this, or that we're attempting to achieve automation of this can be considered CapEx. So this is probably the core part of the model that culminates in the budgetary summation we showed previously in the slides.
Exactly. So in the old world, this deployment would just be OpEx, and it would be, manual, people have to do it manually, it might take them hours and hours and stuff like that. So now we've automated it. So now we get good credit for that.
And the other thing to note is that, essentially this work to automate is a project, because what happens is once we've automated, we're done the work. We won't have the operational work quantified for users anymore, because essentially it's already being done, and we don't have to accommodate it on the timeline. And as Kurt said, representing all work in the board, well, it's not work we're doing anymore. It's been for lack of term, we've invested the time to have a result, to have a feature from it. So yeah, this is part of what CapEx typically.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay. How much is this will this shift with AI and machine learning being infused into product and project management?
I didn't quite hear all that question. I'm sorry. Could you
My
repeat
question
it?
is, how much will this shift with AI, with artificial intelligence being infused into project and product development?
It's a great question.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of here is it really depends on the type of work what you think that AI can automate. I know there's a lot of, personally, I'm not going to be able to answer this question because there's been a lot of talk in the IT industry about automation, but I haven't seen or experienced it yet. I'm not that close to it in terms of saying automating development or creation of a DevOps tool chain or portions of a DevOps tool chain that could easily be done accurately by AI. So I wouldn't be able to give you, I'd be unable to give you an accurate kind of guess right now. I think that's still a few years away before we can kind of get a better gauge for that. I think as it becomes like, development itself is probably what we're looking at as the first wave. And if that is truly automated, if sections of that, I think that could be a sea change, but I have to admit that I lack a lot of exposure to that.
Yeah, okay. I think Dominic, right. I think some of the current applications of AI and stuff like that would be in development, right? Because you can kind of ask an AI, like, how would you develop this? And it might generate a bunch of code for you. So maybe some of these point values go down.
Yep.
Because the development team is more, they have a bazooka now. They don't just have rifles, so I would say that. And then also in test automation, I used to do test automation. I assume, and that's a really interesting question. I'll have to research it. I assume that test automation is going to use this big time. But
that's
like
that's a good point. Because test automation, even though it's out there and core to a lot of it's core to a lot of what the frameworks advocate for, I would say in practice, I have not seen it ever put into place at the scale it needs to be. Though again, my recent experience is government work, so it doesn't necessarily concentrate on industry best practices. So I think that's
what are you saying, Marc?
Yeah, well, we can have a whole different discussion.
So.
Yeah, but I think that's a good point where you could see maybe, because you essentially have the AI can develop, and it can develop test cases where you might see a shift generally there. Might be one of the first places versus trying to create a whole DevOps tool chain that might be much more complex. So it's really where AI can come in and do the first round of work.
yeah, I think you could, you know, use AI to develop unit tests and performance tests and things like that.
If the model is built to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, assuming you have the tools, but this approach definitely would be able to harness AI. I mean, you know, because you're really automating more and more toil.
Yep.
Even the thinking about coding, you're automating. So pretty
I mean,
soon
let's
we're all just going to be superfluous because the GPT monster will do all the work, right?
yeah. Well, I mean, let's admit something. Let's admit the something we did ourselves in order to come up with like as fleshed out a model we have in front of you. We actually utilized AI to like create some of the story level or the feature level breakdown and the descriptions of it. So, you know, the whole process I think will kind of change in different ways, if not just for the shift in, say, the automated toil, but just the breadth of work that can be done in you know a sprint kind of thing. So it may not change your numbers as much as like as what can go in during that period of time. So there's many ways of impact, but I will leave my answer there because as I said, I have a limited amount of exposure myself.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's hilarious. Yeah, Mark, I had forgotten that. Yeah, yeah, product managers will use ChatGPT to just write use cases or write user story descriptions, right? Because you're right, Mark. Like we we actually did use ChatGPT. When was that? Like in June? Like, you know, what's a feature description of, you know, simplified interface? And then it spat this out, which we
Yep.
were amazed at how good it was actually. So
It's awesome.
Yes.
thanks, Mark. See, I wanted everybody to think that we were just so smart that we just wrote all these, um, but no, it is true that it is a tool that is going to be very important.